Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another hadith session, lesson number 13. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fi mil samawati wa mil al-ardi wa mil ma baynahuma wa mil ma shi'ata min shay'in ba'da. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma alimna bima yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna bi karamika ilma. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Kitabul Madhalim. So book of oppression. Fil Madhalim wal Ghasb. So Imam Bukhari starts with in oppressions and in wal ghasb, in taking by force, usurping somebody's property, somebody else's things. And ghasb is taking by force, is opposed to stealing. Stealing is done in that deceptive kind of manner, whereas ghasb is pure brutal force. You just take it right in front of the person knows who did it, and it's you who snatched it away from that person when it was not your haqq, it's not your right. Wa qawlillahi ta'ala. So Imam Bukhari starts off with a ayah from the Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولا تحسبن الله غافلا عما يعمل الظالمون إنما يؤخرهم ليوم تشخص فيه الأبصار مهطعين مقنعي رؤوسهم. Do not consider that Allah is unaware of al-dhalimun, what the oppressors do, the ones who take other people's right without any right. They take other people's possessions, they take what is rightfully theirs. Do not consider Allah as unaware of that. إِنَّمَا يُؤَخِّرُهُمْ لِيَوْمٍ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually giving them respite. Previous nations, subhanAllah, they were not given that kind of respite. They will be punished. If they continue in their sin, they will be punished. And punishments came to different people of different prophets in the past, as you've seen the stories of the prophets. However, this ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, such a big mercy that Allah has delayed any kind of punishment that doesn't come. There's so many oppressors in today's world and so much oppression in many places in the world. However, the punishment doesn't come straight, and that is Allah has left it for the Day of Judgment. لِيَوْمٍ تَشْخَصُ فِيهِ الْأَبْصَارِ. So that day that the gaze, everybody's eyes will be staring in horror. مُهْطِئِينَ. Well, the oppressors this is referring to, but of course it's a day of torment for everyone else. Muhtina muqni rusim, so their necks outstretched and the eyes just looking. They're not considering anything else. It doesn't return to them. The gaze is just staring upwards. That fear on that day. So an oppression, so to take the right of somebody else, is that you do not have the right to do so. So book of oppressions, the first hadith will come on is in chapter number 4. Bab ayn akhaq zaliman al madluman. Assist your brother, the oppressor or the one oppressed. بإسنادنا متصل مشايخنا جزاهم الله خير للإمام بخاري في صحيحه أنه قال حدثنا عثمان ابن أبي شيبة حدثنا هشيم أخبرنا عبيد الله ابن أبي بكر عن ابن أنس وحميد الطويل سمع عن أنس ابن مالك رضي الله عنه يقول قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. So Anas bin Malik رضي الله عنه, he narrates from the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم أنصر أخاك ظالما أو مظلوما, who heard the Prophet ﷺ say, help your brother, the one oppressing or the one oppressed. So whether he's oppressor or oppressed, help him. And the next hadith becomes more clear. وعنه بقال حدثنا مسدد حدثنا معتمر عن حميد عن أنس رضي الله عنه قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أنصر أخاك ظالما أو مظلوما. So the same hadith from the previous. قالوا يا رسول الله, O Messenger of Allah. So the Sahaba radhiyallahu ajma'in, they responded, O Messenger of Allah, هذا ننصره مظلوما فكيف ننصره ظالما. Yes, so they understood how if the brother is oppressed, they know how to help. But what about if he's the one oppressing? How do they help? As in the days of Jahiliyyah, before Islam, pre-Islam, in the Arabian Peninsula, there'll be tribal rivalry, there'll be fierce tribal rivalry, there'll be lots of battles, and just looking at the Aus and the Khazraj, the two tribes who made up the Ansar, the helpers of the Prophet ﷺ later on. The Aus and the Khazraj, there will be war, many times there'll be a huge war, and they'll always be fighting each other for every little kind of, any opportunity to get to war, they would do so, along with other tribes, all over the Arabian Peninsula. There was such. That's why the others, the Romans and the other kind of tribes, they would look at Arabia as a place of there was no kind of like leadership. There was always just fighting amongst each other for even little things, little feuds here and there, always that led to bigger kind of things. So they were like barbaric and backwards people is how they would be regarded. So Islam changed all that. Islam brought a more regulated way, a more way to be with others and stop oppression as well. So it looks after everything. And here they asked the Prophet ﷺ, so how do we help him if he's the oppressor? So the Prophet ﷺ said, تَأْخُذُوا فَوْقَ يَدَيْهِ, that stop him, refrain him from doing that oppression. Remember, the person, your brother or your sister, they're oppressing others. In reality, they're oppressing themselves. On the Day of Judgment, they'll be taken into account. So they're oppressing themselves as well. But of course, they're taking other people's rights, and on the Day of Judgment, everybody's going to be dealt with justly, and rewards will go from one account to another account. If that's emptied, that account, then people's sins will be going on to other people's. So there's all that to let's try and stop this oppression. If he's being oppressed, yes, we know how to do that. But if he's the one who is the oppressor, there needs to be a stopping of that. So, the times of Jahiliyyah, they'll be fighting over nonsense reasons. Your family member, family, kin, relatives, either from your tribe, you just go straight away and help, whatever the reason. You would not even stop to think, what is the reason why we're fighting the other people? They just, we're fighting them, he's fighting them, I'm going to be backing him up and fighting him. So that's that reason that people go without thinking into that and finding out what is the reason why people are fighting anyway and trying to stop it. But of course, if you have the ability to stop with your hands, stop with your hands. Your brother who's oppressing or your sister who's oppressing. But also, if that doesn't, if you don't have strength for that, by saying, this is wrong, you're fighting over, make them understand reason. If you don't, then of course in the heart, and at the very least in the heart, that you feel that that's wrong, and of course do not assist them in that. So that's the teaching of the Prophet ﷺ, teaching us in these hadiths, small beautiful hadiths, that how we stop oppression. As Islam is against all sorts of oppression to whoever, and we are fully against oppression. So the next one is the kitab of manumission of slaves, or emancipation, freeing of slaves. So of course, as I mentioned, slaves, and subhanAllah, we live in a time when supposedly there's no slaves, there's no slavery. We all know that, of course, there's lots of slavery in different forms. This forced labor, people taking people's passports. We hear from investigative reporting, undercover reporting. It comes in the news. You sometimes read on articles on that. People, ringleaders, take away the passports, and then they force people into forced labor and also do all sorts of things, and trafficking, and all these kind of things. So there's always going to be some form of labor of slavery around. But of course, the real slavery has kind of been abolished in that sense, some centuries ago, decades ago, and of course, Islam came. Did it abolish slavery? No, it didn't, because the whole world is built on slavery. You have to understand, you can't just change the whole world, and when that is the norm. Just looking at the story of Yusuf Islam, a totally different time period, generation. He was taken as a slave. He was taken as a slave when he was saved from the well and sold in Egypt, in Misr. So slavery has always been around. Islam came. Islam was always, everything is about gradual development. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings in laws gradually, so that people get accustomed to, used to it, and because it's changing a whole way of life, a whole system of life. So slavery as well. But look at Islam. Islam is always encouraging to free slaves. When the time when slaves, it's encouraging to free them. And we've seen this hadith about eating with them. Can you imagine a master eating with his slave? It's like unimaginable, unfathomable. So Islam encourages to free up slaves. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, at the beginning when Islam was growing, at the beginning, in the first 3 years when it was secret dawah, the Prophet would only tell to people who he believed that would listen to the message and accept it. So the first 40 people who became Muslims were mostly the poor, the weak, and slaves as well. So some, they were brought, they buy the freedom. Abu Bakr bought and made them free. But of course, there's those who became Muslims, but they were also still in slavery, and they had to obey the masters, and the masters punished them. So there's many examples and stories of that as well. But the first generation, the first group of Muslims, a majority, were the weak, the oppressed, and slaves as well. So we have a hadith here, bab إذا أتاه خادمه بطعامه. حدثنا حجاج وأنه بقال حجاج بن منهل حدثنا شعبة قال أخبرني محمد بن زياد قال سمعت أبا هريرة رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا أتى أحدكم خادمه بطعامه فإن لم يجلسه معه فليناوله لقمة أو لقمتين أو أكلة أو أكلتين فإنه ولي علاجه. So Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he narrates that when one of your slaves come, your servants come with your food, and if you do not make him sit, and you make him eat with you, then give him a morsel, a mouthful of one or two, or a whole meal of one or two, as he has prepared it, or he has brought it for you, or he's played some part in that meal. So it's here Islam encouraging for with slaves to eat with your slaves, and of course they may feel embarrassed to sit with their masters, so of course then you can give them a portion and then let them go into their quarters wherever and eat more comfortably, and then they might find themselves more comfortable in doing so. So of course this is around when slavery was around in that sense, that master and slave, that type of slavery I'm talking about. And of course we've seen Black Lives movement and protests and stuff, and Muslims are always for supporting those, they were an oppressed people. Yes, all lives matter, but in this case Black Lives Matter, because you see that happening repeatedly against them, against that ethnic caste. And so we support them. Islam is always against oppression, is always for equality, and is always for it's always with trying to improve things for people who are oppressed. So we have just a book of oppression and book of emancipation of slaves. Again, gems from the hadith, the sayings and the actions and those things approved of by the Prophet ﷺ. So Islam is a beautiful religion, teaches a lot of things, and it's all about us trying to hear the stories of the Prophet ﷺ and his events, and then to putting it into our lives as well, and following that example that the Prophet ﷺ is the only accepted example. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم.